The massive war room aboard the Iron Dominion buzzed with activity as dozens of Veltharian officers gathered around the central command table. Their blue-scaled faces reflected the glow of holographic displays showing tactical data from across their empire. Admiral Vorthak, his forearms crossed behind his back, studied the incoming vessel with the kind of attention usually reserved for genuine threats. But this wasn't a threat. At least, that's what every single one of his officers believed. The human ship appeared on their screens like a bad joke. The UES Mockingbird looked like someone had taken spare parts from a dozen different vessels and welded them together. During a lunch break, mismatched metal panels covered its hull in a patchwork of different colors and textures. Some sections gleamed like new steel, while others showed the dull brown of rust and age. Weapon mounts stuck out at odd angles, connected by exposed cables that any first-year engineering student would be embarrassed to show their instructor. Commander Yul Han, the fleet's chief tactical officer, couldn't contain his laughter as he analyzed the energy readings. His clawed finger pointed at the display showing power signatures that barely registered on their advanced scanners. "Sir, this thing puts out less energy than a civilian transport. Our smallest escort vessel could vaporize it with a single shot." Other officers joined in the amusement. Lieutenant Kexmore shook his head in disbelief. "Look at those weapon systems. Are those actually held together with metal straps? I've seen mining equipment with better construction." The laughter spread through the command center like wildfire. These were the same Veltharians who had conquered 17 different star systems in the past decade. They had faced the war fleets of the Andorian Republic and emerged victorious. They had broken the legendary defenses of the Crystal Worlds. And now the humans were sending them this pathetic excuse for a warship. Admiral Vorthak raised one of his hands for silence. The room fell quiet, but the amusement remained clear on every face. "Gentlemen, let's review what we know about these humans." The main display shifted to show intelligence reports gathered over the past year. Human colonies scattered across 12 systems, their technology decades behind Veltharian standards, their military consisting of converted civilian ships and outdated weapons. The reports painted a picture of a species that had stumbled into space travel rather than mastering it. "They received our ultimatum 3 weeks ago," Vorthak continued, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. "Surrender their colonies and accept Veltharian rule, or face complete annihilation. We gave them time to consider their options, expecting either immediate surrender or at least a desperate military response." Commander Yulhan pulled up the communication logs. "Instead, we received this." A human voice filled the command center, speaking in heavily accented Galactic Standard. "The United Earth Systems requests one final diplomatic meeting to discuss terms. We're sending our diplomatic vessel to your coordinates." More laughter erupted from the assembled officers. The idea that humans thought they could negotiate with the mighty Veltharian supremacy was almost too amusing to believe. These aliens had conquered worlds with populations in the billions. They had technologies that could crack planets and fleets that blotted out stars. What could a handful of human colonies possibly offer that would interest them? "Sir," said Lieutenant Kexmore, still chuckling, "perhaps they're offering us their surrender in person. Humans are known for their strange rituals. Maybe they need to hand over their defeat face to face." Admiral Vorthak considered this possibility. It would certainly be fitting. The other species they had conquered had always sent their finest vessels, their most advanced warships, even in defeat. The humans were sending what looked like a garbage scow with delusions of grandeur. "There's another possibility," suggested Commander Yulhan, his tactical mind working through alternatives. "This could be a distraction. Perhaps their real fleet is preparing to strike at our supply lines while we're focused on this thing." The Admiral's laugh was deep and rumbling. "With what fleet? Our intelligence shows they have maybe 30 ships total, most of them converted civilian vessels. We have 12 dreadnoughts here alone, each one capable of sterilizing an entire planet. Even if they threw every ship they have at us, it would be like insects attacking a mountain." The command staff nodded in agreement. The math was simple and brutal. Veltharian technology was superior in every measurable way. Their shields could absorb anything the humans might throw at them. Their weapons could punch through any known armor. Their ships were faster, more maneuverable, and commanded by officers with decades of combat experience. "So we're agreed," Admiral Vorthak announced, his decision made. "We'll allow their diplomatic vessel to approach. Let them come close enough to see the full majesty of our fleet. Let them understand exactly what they're facing. When they realize the hopelessness of their situation, their surrender will be complete and unconditional." He turned to his communications officer. "Send a response. Tell the humans they may approach, but any aggressive action will result in immediate destruction. Make sure they understand they're coming here to surrender, not to negotiate." As the message was transmitted, the Veltharian officers began making preparations for what they expected to be a highly entertaining encounter. Some placed bets on how quickly the humans would beg for mercy. Others discussed the best ways to broadcast their humiliation across the galaxy as a warning to other species who might consider resisting Veltharian expansion. The UES Mockingbird continued its approach, growing larger on their screens, but no more impressive. If anything, the closer view made it look even more pathetic. Scorch marks covered sections of the hull. Repair patches were visible in multiple locations. The entire vessel gave the impression of something that should have been scrapped years ago, rather than sent on a diplomatic mission. Admiral Vorthak smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. In a few hours, the humans would learn what happened to species foolish enough to challenge the Veltharian supremacy. Their ramshackle ship would serve as the perfect symbol of human defeat, a visual reminder that some jokes weren't meant to be funny. Captain Hyojin sat in her command chair, watching the massive Veltharian fleet grow larger on the main screen. 12 enormous warships hung in space like metal mountains, each one easily 10 times the size of her own vessel. Their dark hulls gleamed with polished armor plating, and rows of weapon ports lined their sides like the eyes of sleeping giants. The formation they had chosen was clearly meant to intimidate, a perfect semicircle that would surround any approaching ship, making escape impossible. "Distance to the fleet?" she asked calmly, her voice cutting through the steady hum of the ship's systems. 15,000 kilometers and closing, Captain," replied Ensign Minho from the navigation station. His young face showed no trace of fear, though sweat beaded on his forehead. The crew of the Mockingbird had trained for this moment for months, but seeing the enemy fleet in person was different from any simulation. Lieutenant Dong-Su moved between workstations with practiced efficiency, his hands flying over control panels that looked nothing like standard human equipment. To any outside observer, the systems appeared jury-rigged and makeshift, a collection of mismatched components held together with determination and hope. But Dong-Su knew better. Every seemingly random wire had been placed with precision. Every odd-looking device served a specific purpose that would soon become very clear. "All systems showing green across the board," he reported quietly. "The masking field is holding steady. Their scanners are still reading us as a low-energy civilian vessel." The ship's AI, affectionately known as Jester, spoke up in its characteristic, dry tone that only the human crew could hear through their neural implants. "Captain, the alien formation is textbook intimidation tactics. Classic overwhelming display designed to break enemy morale before a single shot is fired. Quite effective against most species, I imagine." "And against us?" Hyojin asked silently, her thoughts transmitted directly to the AI. "Well, that depends on whether they realize they're not facing most species, doesn't it?" Jester's response carried what could only be described as digital amusement. "I'm currently analyzing their weapon positions, shield generators, and engine configurations. Fascinating technology, though rather predictable in its implementation." Through the viewports, the human crew could see lights beginning to flicker on across the Veltharian ships. Not their weapon systems, those remained dark, but observation decks and recreational areas. The aliens were literally gathering to watch the show, treating the encounter like some kind of sporting event. The communication system crackled to life with an incoming transmission. Admiral Vorthak's voice filled the bridge, translated into human language by their systems. "Human vessel, you are now in range of our weapons. State your business quickly, before we lose patience with this charade." But it wasn't just the Admiral's voice. Multiple Veltharian frequencies were active, and the universal translator picked up dozens of conversations happening simultaneously across their fleet. The aliens weren't even trying to maintain communication discipline. "Look at that thing. It's held together with spare parts. I've seen ore haulers with better armor plating. Are those weapons or construction equipment? I honestly can't tell. This is what humanity sends to negotiate with the supremacy. It's embarrassing." Captain Hyojin listened to the mockery with an expression of calm patience, though her crew noticed the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. She had heard worse insults during her academy days, and those had come from her own instructors. "Captain," whispered communications officer, "so young, should I respond to their admiral?" "Not yet," Hyojin replied softly. "Let them get comfortable first. Let them think they know exactly what they're dealing with." The Veltharian ships continued to move closer, their formation tightening around the Mockingbird like a closing fist. Through the main viewports, the human crew could see alien faces pressed against windows, their blue-scaled features twisted with amusement and contempt. Some were actually pointing and laughing, as if the human ship was a particularly funny joke. Lieutenant Dongsu finished his final systems check and gave his captain a subtle nod. Everything was ready. Months of preparation, years of research, and decades of human ingenuity had led to this moment. The equipment hidden throughout the ship hummed with barely contained power, disguised as civilian systems and obsolete technology. Jester, Hyojin thought to the AI, "How many of their crew members are currently watching us instead of monitoring their own systems?" "Approximately 60%, Captain. Their attention appears focused on entertainment rather than tactical awareness. I count at least 40 different viewports with crowds of observers. Even some of their bridge crews are distracted." The irony wasn't lost on any of the humans. The Veltharians were so confident, so absolutely certain of their superiority, that they had turned a potential combat situation into a spectacle. Their crews were gathering like crowds at a carnival, eager to witness what they believed would be humanity's moment of defeat. Admiral Vorthak's voice boomed across the communication channels again, now carrying an edge of impatience. "Human? Captain, we grow tired of waiting. You will surrender immediately, or we will demonstrate why resistance is futile. Your pitiful vessel is surrounded by the finest warships in the galaxy. Surely even humans can understand the mathematics of the situation." More laughter erupted from the alien crews. The sound echoed through multiple communication channels, creating a chorus of mockery that would have been demoralizing to almost any other species. But the humans on the Mockingbird had prepared for this reaction. They had counted on it. In fact, Captain Hyojin finally activated her own communication system, her voice calm and professional as it broadcast to the entire Veltharian fleet. "Admiral Vorthak, this is Captain Hyojin of the United Earth Systems vessel Mockingbird. We appreciate your patience and your enthusiasm. We're ready to begin our diplomatic discussion." The way she emphasized the word diplomatic sent a ripple of quiet anticipation through her own crew. They all knew what was coming next. The months of training, the careful preparation, the deliberate design of their supposedly ramshackle vessel, everything had led to this moment when the galaxy would learn that humans were full of surprises. And the biggest surprise was that sometimes the joke wasn't on the person everyone was laughing at. Captain Hyojin leaned back in her command chair and activated the diplomatic protocols with the practiced ease of someone who had done this dance many times before. Her voice took on the formal, slightly stilted tone that galactic diplomacy required, each word carefully chosen and delivered with bureaucratic precision. "Honored Admiral Vorthak of the Veltharian Supremacy," she began, her hands clasped behind her back in a gesture of apparent respect. "The United Earth Systems acknowledges your position and appreciates this opportunity for dialogue. We believe that reasonable beings can always find common ground through patient negotiation." The response from the Veltharian fleet was immediate and predictable. Laughter erupted across multiple communication channels, with alien voices overlapping in their amusement. Admiral Vorthak's own chuckle was deep and rumbling, like stones grinding together. "Common ground?" the Admiral repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. "Human, the only common ground here is your unconditional surrender. But please, Continue with your diplomatic efforts. We have time to be entertained." While her captain spoke, Lieutenant Dong-Su moved through the ship with quiet efficiency. To any observer, he appeared to be conducting routine maintenance checks on their obviously outdated systems. He adjusted settings on control panels that looked like they belonged in a museum, tightened connections on cables that seemed held, together with hope and spare parts, and ran diagnostics on equipment that sparked occasionally just to maintain the illusion. But every action served a deeper purpose. Each maintenance check was actually bringing hidden systems online. The sparking cables were designed to mask the energy signatures of charging weapon capacitors. The outdated control panels were interfaces for technology so advanced that most species wouldn't recognize it even if they saw it completely exposed. "We understand your position regarding our colonies," Captain Hyo-jin continued, her voice maintaining that same diplomatic monotone. "However, we must consider the welfare of our civilian populations. Perhaps we could discuss terms that would ensure their safety during any transition period." The Veltharians ate it up. Their communications were buzzing with commentary about human weakness and desperation. Officers across the fleet were making jokes about how pathetic it was to watch humans beg for mercy. Some were already discussing how they would divide up the human colonies among themselves. "Look at her stalling for time," came one transmission. "She's probably hoping for rescue that will never come." "Humans and their endless talking," added another voice. "No wonder they never accomplished anything significant in space." What they didn't see was communications officer So Young quietly activating scanning protocols that were mapping every ship in their fleet down to the smallest detail. Her console looked like a standard communication array, complete with flickering lights and outdated displays. In reality, it was running analysis programs that were identifying weak points in Veltharian shield generators, cataloging weapon positions, and measuring response times of their defensive systems. The Mockingbird's hull itself was perhaps the greatest deception of all. What appeared to be mismatched salvage and jury-rigged repairs was actually a carefully designed shell hiding humanity's most advanced military technology. The random-looking metal patches concealed sensor arrays that were passively scanning the entire enemy fleet. The exposed cables and odd-angled weapon mounts were positioned with mathematical precision to provide optimal firing solutions once the charade ended. Deep within the ship's core, power systems that registered as barely functional on Alien, sensors were actually running at less than 5% capacity. The energy signatures the Veltharians were detecting represented just the tip of an iceberg that could power a small city when fully activated. "Admiral," Captain Hyo-jin said, her tone becoming slightly more urgent, "surely we can reach some accommodation. Your colonies have resources that might be valuable to your empire. Mining rights, perhaps, or agricultural products." The alien fleet was now completely relaxed. Several of the larger warships had actually powered down their secondary weapon systems to conserve energy for the long journey to human space that would follow their expected victory. Crew rotations had been adjusted so that more aliens could gather at viewports to watch the diplomatic humiliation unfold. Admiral Vorthak's patience was wearing thin, exactly as Captain Hyo-jin had intended. "Enough of this waste of time," he growled across the communication channels. "Human Captain, you have exactly 60 seconds to announce your unconditional surrender, or we will demonstrate what happens to species that try our patience." Behind him, his bridge crew was chuckling and making comments about human stubbornness. The entire Veltharian fleet had settled into a comfortable sense of superiority, treating the encounter like a mildly amusing diversion before getting on with the serious business of conquest. Lieutenant Dong-Su caught his captain's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Every system was ready. Targeting solutions were locked in. The power cores were prepared to surge from their current minimal output to full combat capacity in less than 3 seconds. "Jester," Captain Hyo-jin thought to the ship's AI, "are you ready for the reveal?" "Captain," came the AI's dry response, "I have been ready since we left Earth space. The irony of this situation is quite delicious. They're so busy laughing at our appearance that they haven't noticed we've been scanning their entire fleet for the past 20 minutes. The 60 seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness. "Admiral Vorthak," counted down the final moments with obvious satisfaction, his voice booming across all frequencies. 10 seconds, human. 987654321. Time is up. What is your answer? Captain Hyojin looked around her bridge at her crew. These men and women had volunteered for what everyone back on Earth considered a suicide mission. They had trained for months with equipment that didn't officially exist, preparing to face an enemy that had never lost a battle. And now, in this moment of truth, every single one of them was smiling. She activated her communication system one final time, her voice carrying across space to reach every Veltharian vessel, every alien ear that was listening for humanity's moment of defeat. No. The single word hung in space like a challenge, simple and absolute. For exactly 3 seconds, there was complete silence across all communication channels. The Veltharians were processing what they had just heard, trying to understand how any species could be foolish enough to reject their demands. Then the UES Mockingbird stopped pretending to be a joke. The sound that erupted from the human ship was unlike anything the Veltharians had ever heard. It wasn't the whine of charging energy weapons or the rumble of missile systems. It was something entirely new, a deep, harmonic pulse that seemed to resonate through space itself, announcing that the real fight was about to begin. The transformation began with what looked like hull breaches opening across the Mockingbird's surface. Sections of mismatched plating that had appeared damaged and hastily repaired suddenly folded back with mechanical precision, revealing gleaming weapon arrays underneath. What the Veltharians had mistaken for structural weak points were actually concealed launch bays and targeting systems. Lieutenant Dongsu's fingers flew across his console as hidden mechanisms throughout the ship activated simultaneously. The exposed cables that had sparked and flickered during their approach weren't signs of poor maintenance. They were fiber-optic networks carrying targeting data at light speed. The odd-angled weapon mounts that had looked jury-rigged suddenly swiveled with smooth precision, their true purpose finally revealed. "My God," whispered one of the Veltharian tactical officers, his voice carrying across their open communication channels. "Those aren't repair patches, they're weapon housings." The Mockingbird's energy signature spiked dramatically as its power cores surged from minimal output to full capacity. What had registered as barely functional civilian-grade systems now showed readings that made the alien sensors scream warnings. The pathetic little human ship was putting out more raw energy than some of their escort vessels. But the real shock came when the weapons fired. Instead of the bright energy beams or explosive projectiles that dominated galactic warfare, the Mockingbird unleashed something the Veltharians had never encountered. Invisible waves of quantum energy lanced out from the human ship, each beam precisely targeted at specific points on the alien vessels. The shots didn't create explosions or leave scorch marks. They simply turned things off. The Eternal Supremacy. Admiral Vorthak's flagship was the first target. The massive dreadnought had dominated countless battlefields, its shields and armor capable of withstanding planet-cracking weapons. But the quantum disruptor beam passed through its defenses, like they weren't even there. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, like a city during a power outage, the great warship began to go dark. Bridge lights flickered and died. Engine exhaust cut off abruptly. The constant hum of life support systems fell silent. Within seconds, the most powerful vessel in the Veltharian fleet was reduced to a lifeless hulk drifting in space. "What did they do to us?" Admiral Vorthak's voice crackled through emergency communication systems, barely audible through the static. "All systems are failing. Engineering, report." But engineering couldn't report. Their consoles were dead. Their backup power was offline. Even their manual controls had somehow been rendered inoperable. The quantum disruptors hadn't destroyed the ship's systems. They had somehow convinced them to stop working entirely. The effect spread through the Veltharian fleet like a plague. The second dreadnought, Iron Will, suffered the same fate as invisible beams found their target. Then the Stellar Crusher. Then Void Hunter. One by one, the mighty warships that had conquered 17 star systems fell silent and dark. Panic, erupted across the alien communication channels. Captains screamed orders that couldn't be carried out. Engineers reported impossible readings before their own systems failed. Weapons officers tried desperately to return fire, but their targeting computers had gone offline along with everything else. "It's not possible," came one transmission from a ship that was still functioning. "Our shields are designed to stop any known weapon type. How are they penetrating our defenses?" Communications officer So Young looked up from her station with a grim smile. "Captain, their emergency frequencies are going crazy. They're trying to understand what we hit them with." Captain Hyojin stood from her command chair, watching as ship after ship in the enemy fleet went dark. The months of intelligence gathering, the careful analysis of Veltharian technology, the development of weapons specifically designed to counter their defenses, it was all paying off exactly as planned. "Jester," she thought to the ship's AI, "how many vessels are still operational?" "4 ships remain functional, Captain," came the dry response. "However, their crews appear to be suffering from what humans might call performance anxiety. They seem reluctant to engage a target that just disabled 8 dreadnoughts in under 2 minutes. The remaining Veltharian ships were indeed hesitating, their commanders finally understanding that they weren't facing a desperate refugee vessel crewed by primitives. The humans had played them perfectly, using their own arrogance and assumptions. Against them, Lieutenant Dongsu's targeting systems locked onto the remaining functional vessels. "Captain, we have firing solutions on all remaining targets. Quantum disruptors are charged and ready." "Hold fire," Hyojin ordered. She wanted the surviving aliens to fully comprehend what had just happened. The Mockingbird wasn't some lucky shot or experimental prototype that had gotten in one good hit. It was a precision instrument designed from the ground up to neutralize Veltharian military technology. Admiral Vorthak's voice cut through the chaos on the emergency frequencies, his tone no longer carrying the confident arrogance of minutes before. "Human vessel, what have you done to our ships? What kind of weapon was that?" Captain Hyojin activated her own communication system, her voice calm and professional as it broadcast to the entire fleet, both the ships that could still hear her and the ones drifting helplessly in the void. "Admiral, you asked what humanity's response would be to your ultimatum." She paused, letting her words sink in across the alien fleet. "You're looking at it." The human ship hung in space like a predator, surrounded by its prey. What had looked like a ramshackle collection of spare parts now revealed itself as something far more dangerous. A weapon system disguised as a joke, a trap baited with the aliens' own contempt for human capabilities. "For months, your intelligence services have been watching our colonies, studying our defenses, analyzing our technology," Captain Hyojin continued. "What you didn't realize is that we were watching you too. Every battle you fought, every ship design you deployed, every tactical doctrine you used, we studied it all. The remaining functional Veltharian vessels were backing away now, their crews finally understanding the true nature of their situation. They had come expecting an easy victory over a primitive species. Instead, they had walked into a carefully prepared demonstration of what happened when humans had time to think, plan and prepare. The Mockingbird wasn't built to fight your kind of war," Hyojin explained, her voice carrying to every survivor in the alien fleet. "It was built to end it." The silence that followed was deafening. 12 massive Veltharian warships, each one capable of reducing planets to ash, now drifted through space like abandoned monuments to overconfidence. Their hulls remained intact, their crews still breathing, but every system that made them instruments of war had simply stopped working. Captain Hyojin walked slowly around her bridge, observing the tactical display that showed the complete devastation of the enemy fleet. Red indicators marked each disabled vessel, their power signatures barely registering on sensors. The mighty Veltharian supremacy had been reduced to floating metal coffins in less time than it took to brew a cup of coffee. "Damage assessment complete, Captain," reported Lieutenant Dongsu, though his voice carried a note of amazement even after months of training for this moment. "All 12 vessels are completely disabled. Their main power grids are offline, weapon systems are non-functional, and propulsion is dead. However, life support systems are operating normally on all ships." That last detail was crucial. The quantum disruptors had been programmed with surgical precision, targeting only the systems that made the Veltharian ships dangerous while leaving their crews alive to witness what had happened. It was a calculated mercy that would serve a greater purpose. Communications officer So Young monitored the emergency frequencies, listening to the chaos erupting across the alien fleet. "Captain, they're trying to understand what happened. Some of their engineers are reporting that their systems haven't been damaged. They've just stopped responding to commands. It's like their computers have forgotten how to work." Through the viewports of their disabled ships, Veltharian crew members pressed their faces against the transparent aluminum, staring at the human vessel that had single-handedly destroyed their fleet. The same aliens who had been laughing and pointing just minutes earlier now watched with expressions of shock and growing terror. Admiral Vorthak's voice crackled through the emergency communication system, his earlier arrogance replaced by something approaching panic. "Human ship, our vessels are completely disabled. Our crews are trapped. What do you want from us?" Captain Hyo-jin activated her communication array, ensuring her message would reach not just the Admiral, but every survivor across the entire fleet. Her voice was calm, professional, and carried the weight of careful planning behind every word. "Admiral Vorthak, let me be absolutely clear about your situation," she began. "Your crews are alive because we chose to keep them alive. Your life. Support systems are functioning because we allowed them to continue functioning. Your rescue beacons are active because we want you to be found." She paused, letting the implications sink in across 12 ships full of stranded aliens. "You came here expecting to witness humanity's surrender. Instead, you're going to deliver our message to the rest of the galaxy." The message was elegant, in its simplicity. While the Veltharians had been celebrating their technological superiority and planning the conquest of human space, humanity had been doing what humans did best: learning, adapting, and preparing for exactly this scenario. Every battle the aliens had fought, every ship they had deployed, every tactical manual they had distributed had been studied by human intelligence. "Your government believed they were dealing with a primitive species," Captain Hyo-jin continued, her words carrying to every corner of the disabled fleet. "They saw our converted civilian ships and outdated weapons and assumed we were easy prey. What they didn't see was that we were buying time." Lieutenant Dong-soo pulled up intelligence. Files on his console, data that had been gathered over months of careful observation. Human spy networks had infiltrated Veltharian space, studying their technology, analyzing their ship designs, and identifying the specific frequencies and system architectures that made their vessels vulnerable to quantum disruption. The Mockingbird itself was the culmination of this intelligence gathering. Every mismatched hull plate had been chosen to conceal specific weapon systems. Every jury-rigged component had been designed to mask the ship's true capabilities. The entire vessel was a carefully constructed deception, built to look exactly like what the Veltharians expected to see from humanity: primitive, desperate, and harmless. "You laughed at our ship," Captain Hyo-jin said, her voice now carrying a hint of satisfaction. "You called it a joke, a pathetic excuse for a warship. You were absolutely right, it was a joke. The punchline is that the joke was on you." Days passed before the Veltharian rescue fleet arrived. When they did, they found a scene that would haunt their military leadership for generations. 12 of their most advanced warships, crewed by their most experienced officers, floating helplessly in space after being defeated by a single human vessel that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. The rescue operation itself became a source of humiliation. Veltharian engineers swarmed over the disabled ships, trying desperately to understand what had happened to their systems. Their computers showed no damage, no overloads, no signs of conventional weapons impact. The quantum disruptors had simply convinced their technology to stop working, leaving behind perfectly intact but completely useless warships. Admiral Vorthak was among the last to be evacuated from his flagship. As he stood in the shuttle bay, looking back at the eternal supremacy, the ship that had been his pride and the symbol of Veltharian might, he finally understood the full scope of what had occurred. The humans hadn't just defeated his fleet. They had made it irrelevant. The species that everyone in the galaxy had dismissed as backward and primitive had turned their own underestimation into a weapon. While other civilizations built bigger ships and more powerful guns, humanity had studied their enemies and built something specifically designed to make those ships and guns useless. The intelligence reports that reached Veltharian High Command painted a disturbing picture. If humans could build one ship like the Mockingbird, they could build more. If they could disable 12 dreadnoughts in 4 minutes, they could do the same to entire fleets. The species that had seemed like easy conquest had revealed themselves to be something far more dangerous, an enemy that fought with their minds instead of just their weapons. Back on Earth, Captain Hyojin and her crew were debriefed by officials who could barely believe the mission reports. The Mockingbird had accomplished something that traditional military thinking said was impossible. It had won a war without firing a single shot that actually destroyed anything. The final message. Humanity sent to the Veltharian supremacy was delivered by the survivors of the disabled fleet. It was simple, direct, and carried the weight of demonstrated capability behind every word. Leave human space alone, or the next joke we tell won't be as funny. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the species everyone laughs at gets the last laugh. And when humans told a joke, the punchline could disable your entire fleet.